process. They have a lot of pop-ups. The council has divided their work into 5 work groups: availability of land, permitting, codes and design, finance, and workforce shortages. Those work groups are tackling various barriers or recommendations or topics associated with their scopes of work that were either from the plan framework or have been referred to the work groups by the council via the consent agenda. And as those potential recommendations are finalized by the work groups, they bring them up to the council. At the council level, they go through a 3-reading process. First reading is introducing the recommendation to the council and to the public. Second reading is collecting public comment and testimony on potential recommendations. And the third is a discussion and a vote of the council. If a recommendation is adopted at that third reading, it's on a preliminary basis, and the council will be reviewing all of their preliminarily adopted recommendations in December to finalize their full slate of recommendations for the governor at the end of the year. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Co-Chair Tevye.
Great, thank you, Matt. It's going to be a busy day. I just counted we have over 40 items on our agenda between second, third, and first readings. So we're going to try and be as judicious as we can with our time. And so I just ask everybody, for questions, keep to, especially for the members of the public, to keep to your 3-minute allotted time. We'll try and get comments back at all. And obviously, we always encourage people to submit written testimony. The written testimony is a great way to make sure it's being included by text into the final report as an appendices. So we really encourage that. With that, I think we'll just get started into some of the second readings for public comment. And yeah, so I'll turn that back over to Matt.
Great. Thank you, Co-Chair Tevye. So we've had not a lot of people sign up to give in advance to give testimony. So we will be looking to the hand raising in the webinar for anybody who wants to give public comment. And our first item up for public comment is our recommendations from the availability of land work group. And there's one potential recommendation that's expanding brownfield redevelopment funding programs. So if a member of the public would like to testify in the brownfield recommendation, please raise your hand now. I am not seeing any hands raised, so we will go ahead and move to the land development and permit applications recommendations up for a second reading. The first item up is early feasibility acceptance. So we have nobody signed up in advance. If there are any members of the public who would like to testify on this recommendation, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands, we will move to the appeals expedited process recommendation. Anybody interested in testifying on the appeals expedited process recommendation, please raise your hand. All right, seeing no hands, next is the appeals LUBA electronic filing recommendation. Anybody interested in testifying on the appeals LUBA electronic filing recommendation, please raise your hand. First up, Peggy Lynch.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for all your work. I just want to say that the League has supported this in the past and will support it again should it show up at the legislature. Thanks for putting this on the agenda.
Great. Thank you, Peggy. Anybody else? Anyone else interested in testifying on the LUBA, excuse me, LUBA electronic filing process? All right. Seeing nobody raising their hand, we'll move to the codes and design recommendations on second reading. First up is the single stair recommendation with Boley. Anyone interested in testifying on the single stair recommendation with Boley, please raise your hand. And I've got a few folks raising their hands. First person is Ian McKenzie.
Good afternoon. My name is Ian McKenzie, and I'm here to support the recommendation to come up with safe rules for single-stair apartment buildings throughout the state of Oregon, informed by the existing codes in places like the City of Seattle. While there may be a need for opt-out for fire departments in smaller jurisdictions, these rules should be based on clear and objective standards. I encourage you to consider the BOLI wage rate exemption as a separate item. While there may be merit to recommending it, it is unrelated, and linking the two issues is likely to make it harder for either to move forward. In my career, I've worked on the design of over 500 units of housing in Oregon. In every project I've worked on, the building is laid out with a double-loaded corridor. That's a layout we're all familiar with from staying in hotels. A long corridor has doors on either side of it. These doors access hotel rooms or homes, which typically only have windows on one side. That layout is not, however, common internationally. As you might guess from my accent, I'm not originally from Oregon. I grew up in Scotland, where I studied architecture. While I was a student, I lived in the beautiful apartment buildings that are common in Edinburgh and Glasgow. These are typically arranged as 3 or 4 flats per floor, each accessed from a single shared stairwell. This layout is both efficient and elegant. Little floor space is devoted to corridors, and the flats can be arranged so they have windows on 2 or 3 sides. It's common to have flats with 3, 4, or even 5 bedrooms. Unfortunately, that kind of layout is illegal in Oregon for any buildings over 3 stories tall. If we adopt code substantially similar to what already exists in the City of Seattle, we can be confident that the safety of Oregons is protected. In the Seattle code, the shared single stairwell can only serve 4 units per floor. The stair must be pressurized to prevent smoke entry, a requirement that goes beyond what existing Oregon code requires for 6-story buildings. It requires that all unit front doors be within 20 foot of the stair, a much shorter distance than the 50-foot dead-end corridor that Oregon currently allows in buildings with 2 stairs. At a recent American Institute of Architects conference, one presenter from Denver shared over 30 examples of recently built apartments in Seattle that use this code provision. I understand that there are almost that many buildings again in permitting in Seattle. This has caught the attention of advocates and practitioners in Colorado, California, the rest of Washington, and of course, here in Oregon. As Oregon grows denser, it's vital that we ensure that multifamily housing that we build includes options for apartments for single people and couples. We also need options for roommates. We need options for families. We need options for multi-generational households. By moving forward with this recommendation, you'll be making it much easier to design for the diversity of needs that Oregonians have. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. The next person signed up or with the hand raised is Jonathan Balkema.
Thank you for all you guys' work. And I know this concept really didn't start with you guys, it started with the legislature too, but really I just want to talk about the stairs. And I think it's important to note that there's obviously some concerns that's going to have to be worked through with BCD, and the benefit may not be there as much as we would like to think in the current concept, because while there is, great benefit to it, there's a reason why, unfortunately, it hasn't been currently adopted in the model code that this state of Oregon adopts. So that's one of the aspects is going to need to be worked through. And while the measure may be good, and I know Seattle has adopted it, it may be better to postpone the concept until it's been adopted in the model codes. But some of the things to consider is, again, it's not locally adopted, which can be problematic in certain aspects, because for like in Oregon, we get rated or as a local jurisdiction based on insurance and meeting the model codes. So when we deviate from the model codes, often BCD ends up having to justify why we lessen standards than the model code, because the insurance companies help write those model codes. So there's some challenges that would be faced. But I think one of the big ones, and even off of your guys' proposal, it references the size of the stair. Keep in mind that, for most cases, the additional stair, not counting the corridor that Ian just talked about, we're only looking at approximately 200 to 300 additional square feet of ground floor area, and then whatever you need for your corridor, which can be an exit balcony and those sorts of things. So it may be a land use amenity that you already have. But once you go over 3 stories tall, generally need aerial access to meet the fire department's requirements, which then adds to additional challenges on the site, which may negate the usefulness of this type of a provision, because instead of trading 300 square feet on a ground floor of an apartment building, now you're putting in, 400 feet, 500 feet worth of parking space for a fire apparatus. And then, as was brought up in the legislative actions of that, not all jurisdictions currently have, a large supply of aerial access and stuff, aerial apparatus. So there could be increased costs to jurisdictions. So one thought is, instead of a true code amendment until it's adopted in the model code, is to do what the state refers to as a statewide alternate method. And then that way there's better ability to put parameters on it. Like in this case, the local fire marshal, the fire department, fire district actually has to sign off on the use of it within their district. So that way they can make sure that they have the ability to actually adequately protect individuals if we're increasing the risk of people living on a 4th and 5th story that's not currently adopted in the model code. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you so much.
Next up, Michael Anderson.
If you're talking, are you there, Michael? You are, we can't hear you.
I see another Michael Anderson with their hand up, so I'll try that one.
Hey, I think that may be someone else using a link that came to my email. Sorry about that. I'll just say that I'm speaking in favor of the proposal. I agree with the previous testimony that just splitting these into 2 separate recommendations would seem to make sense because they're somewhat unrelated. And I would echo the Ian's take that it's perfectly fine to provide for different standards for cities based on their local fire apparatus, but this should be a clear and objective standard rather than a discretionary decision. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you. I'll try this again. If the other Michael Anderson would like to testify, go ahead. Or whoever is on here who is under the name Michael Anderson.
Hello there. Yes, sorry, Michael. Did share the link, and it seems like I've made a Zoom faux pas, so apologies for that. Thank you, everyone. My name's Matt Tuckerbaum. I am here to voice my strong support for the recommendation that would allow small multi-dwelling buildings up to 5 floors to be served by a single stairwell. I also want to share my belief that the single stair building code change recommendation should be separated from the bully wage recommendation so that they may be weighed independently. I support the safe single stair rule change for the following reasons. It allows for more flexibility in dwelling unit sizes, which means a better social mix for buildings and a larger supply of family-size homes. It could lower construction costs by dedicating less floor area to stairwells and corridors, and by allowing for more efficient unit layouts. It enables medium density on small lots, which means more affordable homes on urban infill lots and less development pressure on farmland and forests. And it allows us to build climate resilient homes that can be naturally cross-ventilated as temperatures rise, while protecting urban tree canopy by making it easier to build up as opposed to maxing out lot coverage. To me, legalizing 5-story single-stair buildings is an easy win to help us get out of our housing shortage. The critical next step, as has been discussed here today, is to develop objective and reasonable standards for implementation of these codes updates rather than leaving it up to local discretion. Seattle, New York, and Honolulu, as well as most countries around the world, have found a way to house their residents in single-stair buildings with no observed detriment to resident safety. While adapting to a new building typology may require some initial adjustment by our community safety professionals and first responders, I'm confident that we can determine explicit criteria that set safety standards in line with what most municipalities throughout the state can accommodate. I deeply appreciate your attention to this issue and ask that setting those clear and objective standards for implementation be the next focus of your work on single-stair code reform. Thanks for your time.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Next up, Jacob.
Hi there. For the record, my name is Jacob Apenis. I'm a 25-year-old and a lifelong resident of Portland. I'm here today to voice my support for the single stair recommendation, and also here to ask that the recommendation be split into two, with one recommendation to allow the use of single stairs for buildings up to 5 stories tall, and a second recommendation relating to the wage rate exemption. Over the past 2 years, I've been fortunate to travel through Europe and rent apartments in pretty nice cities. In September of 2022, I spent a month in a studio apartment in Nice, France. In October 2022, I was in Barcelona. And then in August of this year, I spent a month in Leipzig, Germany. What's most noticeable about these studio apartments and these developments is the use of a single staircase. An entrance connected to a staircase and usually an elevator that connects to a section of apartments on the whole block. In Nice, my building was one of many single staircase buildings lined up one after the other. In Barcelona, it was the same, and in Leipzig, it was the same. Leipzig was pretty noticeable in being pretty massive for large developments. I'm sorry, was I given 3 minutes or just 1 minute? Oh, okay.
If you want to just wrap up your comments, we'll give
Yeah.
you, I think there's a timer issue. So go ahead and keep going through your comments.
No worries. I was just going to add that I was really fond of these kinds of developments through Europe, and I'd love to see them in Portland. These buildings were fairly compact with a little good space given for hallways. My apartments in Nice and Barcelona had common patios on the back, and Leipzig had ample yard space. These cities felt pretty compact and walkable with these kind of developments, and it was pretty hard to find double-loaded corridors across these cities. And with that, yield my time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. If there's anybody else who would like to provide a comment on this recommendation, please raise your hand now. All right, we'll move on to the next codes and design recommendation on second reading, the density swap recommendation. Does anybody who would like to testify on the density swap recommendation? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, we will move to the middle housing recommendation. Anyone interested in providing comment on the middle housing, please raise your hand. First up, Jonathan.
I thank you. Looking at the proposal, you might want to look at the wording to make sure that your intent's being fully captured, because my understanding is while it says, modify the state code, the intent is to basically allow the use of utilities by the public utility systems, which just modifying the plumbing code and modifying the electrical code type things wouldn't necessarily fix that, because we currently already have some paths we can get to from the plumbing and building code aspect. It's really getting the public utility side of it. So if the intent's really to focus on that, you might want to clarify the intent of that. And then I know there was discussions where there seems to be some concern over it. So you might also consider, allowing the local utility district to, kind of limit the path to those lots that are now being created through middle housing subdivisions. So that way, if it's, a larger subdivision, townhouse subdivision or something, they can still get individual utilities if that's what their preferred method is. It's really more for the parent being subdivided off. I think that's kind of the intent that you guys were getting at. And then you may want to also explicitly allow the utility to require upsizing of the services if that's their path to get to the manifold. So that way, say they decide to do like they do in commercial and say it has to be a 6-inch service, so that way they can deal with the amount of fixture units, because unfortunately the number of fixture units you can have on a 4-inch line is pretty, not necessarily tight, but tight enough when you don't know what's going to be built there, given the wide variety you can build on a middle housing unit. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Any other individuals interested in providing testimony? All right, if not, we will move to the visitability and accessibility recommendation. Anyone interested in providing public comment, please raise your hand. First up, Jonathan.
I promise this is the last time I'm going to talk today. So one thought, I know there was some discussion earlier on the, somewhat disagreement in what is visible. One, I know you added a section in the proposal that kind of clarifies it, but one thought would be to use what the building code already uses for the accessibility documents, and inside A117.1, it already has a visitable definition, a type C unit, just so that way it's clear and concise to everybody. And then as visitable changes over the life of that document, it would be updated with the appropriate code. So there's some chance there, and that document generally gets deemed as a safe harbor for the DOJ 8Ag standards. So it's a nice document for that use. And then obviously there's the additional, I definitely support the idea of adding additional living in place type amenities in the housing. There may be some pushback in the context of adding blocking to all bathrooms on the first floor, where there may be bathrooms that aren't actually usable. A lot of homes, especially 2-story homes, 3-story homes, have a powder bathroom on the main floor, and often the powder bathroom doesn't have required clear floor area for what we deem as actually accessible. So there may be some spots where we're adding additional costs to builders that one, will never see blocking, and then two, wouldn't be very usable for a person that actually had mobility challenges. So anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Anyone else interested in providing testimony? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, we will move to the franchise utility timeline recommendation. Anybody interested in providing public comment? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, we will close out the second readings for the codes and design recommendations, and we will move to the finance recommendations. First up, the first recommendation up for a second reading is the insurance and risk pool recommendation. We have one person who signed up in advance, Jason Elzy. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Jason Elzy. I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Authority of Jackson County. First, I'd like to quickly say thank you to all of the committee members for all of the work that you're doing. This is critical work that I believe will impact Oregon greatly. I'm highly concerned about what is going on in our industry of affordable housing and the ability to provide, to insure our properties. This will greatly impact not only our existing portfolio of affordable housing in the state of Oregon, but also the potential to develop future housing in the state of Oregon. I highly support the recommendation. I know that within your packet, the recommendation includes a study that was conducted by Oregon Housing and Community Services, and the results of that study that was set forth about a year ago. That clearly outlines that between 2020 and 2022, there was a severe increase in the cost of insurance in the affordable rental housing industry. But What we know now, and this is timely because the Housing Authority of Jackson County, along with many of our colleagues, also just received new quotes for 2024 insurance on our housing portfolio. For the Housing Authority of Jackson County, in a 2-year period, our insurance costs increased by 65%. Between 2020 and 2024, our increase is now more than doubled. That's not sustainable for affordable rental housing. Here's why. Affordable rental housing, when built with state and federal funds, are often deed restricted for 60 years. That's 60. That means that we are on a fixed income. We can only control what we can control based on what HUD and the state of Oregon authorizes for rent increases. Operating expenses, and we're caught in the middle of an inflationary factor where we're seeing inflation exceeding 10% across our board for operating expenses. But when we're seeing in a 5-year period our insurance costs more than double, we have little to control that in the market. A private landlord might raise rents and pass that extra cost on to a tenant. In our case, we're deed restricted, we're income restricted, we have no other means. For those of those colleagues in the room that also operate affordable housing, you know that we have debt service ratios that are dictated and required by investors and lenders. When we don't meet those debt service coverage ratios, we become in default with our loans. We are seriously at that point of being in default of our housing portfolio of more than 1,500 rental units because of the costs of inflationary factors, particularly with insurance. In just 5 years, we've seen that double. If we see this trend continue, our housing portfolio, as far as our revenues versus expenses, we will be in the red and we will be in default. Not only is that concerning for this, I think that's just an example of the Housing Authority of Jackson County. If you talk to our colleagues throughout the state, many are seeing that same factor. We're highly concerned. I think that there are solutions there, but the recommendation that's in front of you, I highly support. We need to understand exactly what the problems are and start studying what solutions might be to put forth potential state solutions to help with this issue. And for that reason, I highly support this recommendation. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Jason. Anyone else interested in providing comment? Please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, we will move to the local infrastructure funding surge recommendation. Anyone interested in providing public comment, please raise your hand. First up, Peggy.
Good afternoon again, everyone. Peggy Lynch, League of Women Voters of Oregon. Infrastructure funding is exactly what the League has been working on for a number of years related to housing, particularly for affordable housing issues. So we certainly support the concepts listed here. We did not testify on the previous one because the League has a process for assuring that we have a particular position related to things like insurance. But in fact, the story of Jackson County is one that many of our members down in the Rogue Valley can relate to. I do want to say for the rest of the funding, the rest of the finance ideas, the League will be interested in seeing which ones come up before the legislature in 2024, which in 2025. And most of the time we will be there to try to make sure that there's enough money for staffing and programs at the local level and staffing and programs at the state level to address our housing needs. I will say that one of the comments is the pre-production dollars. We were pleased to support Senator Anderson's bill last session, and he got over $5 million in the early funding for housing related to that particular cost. We are interested in consolidated tax reform, anything that will make sure that we have funding that we need for the housing that we need for all Oregonians. And with that, I won't raise my hand for the rest of them. Just know that we are here and we are ready to help where we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Anyone else interested in testifying? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, we will move to the Catalyzing Portland recommendation. If you're interested in providing comment, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands, we will move to the HFA creation recommendation. Anyone interested in providing comment, please raise your hand. Seeing none, we will move to consolidated tax reform. Anyone interested in providing comment on consolidated tax reform, please raise your hand. All right, seeing no hands, we will move to the Modular Housing Incentive Program. Anyone interested in providing comment on the Modular Housing Incentive Program, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands, we will move to the Housing Cash Bounty recommendation. Please raise your hand for public comment. Seeing no hands, we will move to the Low Interest Loan Fund recommendation. Anyone interested in providing public comment on the Low Interest Loan Fund recommendation, please raise your hand. All right. With that, that concludes the second readings. I will pass it back to Co-Chair Tuvey.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you to the public for providing that testimony. Again, at any time, please provide written statements, especially as we get into the next round. We'll be plowing through a whole bunch of recommendations in the next 2 or 3 meetings. So we want to make sure that we get as much public comments as we possibly can. I see Deborah has her hand up. Do you have a question?
Tuvey, in regards to just 2 of the recommendations, I just wanted to provide some comments that had come back either from our committee or I had received a few emails this week. And so I just wanted to send it out to the Finance Committee on 2 of the recommendations to consider as they're putting together the 3rd round. One is in regards to the consolidated tax reform. There is some comments in regards to a couple of the specifics, and I'm happy I have a lengthy email that I'll send to you. The comments are that there is some issues regarding housing production and that there quite possibly could actually be a reduction in housing in regards to 1 or 2 of the items. And I will send that off to you so you can look at that. The second item is in regards to the Modular Housing Incentive Program. Apparently there was a bill that was passed. It was obviously the ONA bill that was HB 2001 that was for $20 million this last session for modular housing. And this individual just wanted to make sure that we were aware of that as this was going forward. So I'm passing that along. And then the second item is this only related to modular housing or would this be for any alternative type of building methods? And so my question would be is that if it is, focused on alternative building methods, perhaps it could be either expanded or looked at to have, 3D panelization, OptiFrame, etc. is my, and I may be off in regards to what I'm asking. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think so. You'll just pass that on, and I'm sure Ivory and Daniel will take a look at that information and incorporate as necessary. Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Just no comment, but I would think it'd be appropriate to recognize that Representative Breeze Iverson has joined us. She has been from the start, but in place of Representative Helfrich. And she's a realtor and should add a lot to our conversation and gathering.
You read my mind. That was what my next topic was to introduce Representative Iverson. Representative Iverson, do you want to make an introduction, or do you want to? You can keep going on if you want. You might have stepped away from the computer.
No,
Oh,
I'm
that's
right here. Thank you.
Okay,
I've
there
been
you are.
having a little bit of technical difficulty, so I've been leaving my camera off, but I am very appreciative to be part of the conversation and moving into this arena of this conversation of housing. It's as mentioned by the good senator, kind of near and dear to my heart, being a realtor for 20 plus years. So I am happy to be here, and I'm just kind of observing and taking it in at the moment, and do have a few thoughts of my own that we'll share along the way. So thank you, guys.
Well, great. With that, I just noticed that we'll have to update that name on the advisory council for our agenda. And with that, I think we're moving into third reading. So we'll get to vote on some of these. So I hope to hear everybody's opinions on this too. So I'll turn that over. And I did have a procedural question for Matt. For some of these, they're just highlighted, like the updated wetlands recommendation option A is highlighted but not linked. So we're still voting on those correctly? Correct?
Yeah, so I can give a process update for council members. There were some updated recommendations that were submitted by the work groups, some changes. And so, for the purpose of the third reading, my understanding is the work group chairs will talk through what those changes are. And you were also sent some new recommendations. For members of the public, they can find the updated agenda on the HPAC website with the updated recommendations and new first reading recommendations. And they in the agenda are highlighted on the website. In the agenda, they are both highlighted and linked to make sure that they can be easily found for members of the public.
Great. With that, I will kick off with the very first one for land availability. We're looking at wetlands recommendation, option A, the updated session. Do you have something to update?
Thank you, Chair Tovey. Matt, did you want to put this up, or I'm happy to pull it up. I have it on my screen if you'd like.
I can pull it up.
I'd like to actually pass this over to Eric Olson and have Eric as the chair of the Land Development Committee speak to the changes.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Great. So this looks like we've made a lot of major changes, which is really not actually the case. What we've tried to do is originally we had two wetland recommendations, both of which received a fair amount of comments from DLCD and from DSL. And in an effort to try to create at least one recommendation that had a large amount of support from both those agencies, we have sort of broken the recommendations into three: recommendation A, B, and C. And we do have support, I think broad support on recommendation A. Part of the reason for doing this is we are in a crisis really for wetlands in our state, and we thought that this could potentially sort of rise to the top and maybe make the summer session. So with something that didn't necessarily have the controversy that some of the other recommendations did, we thought this was a way, kind of a appropriate way to break them into three different parts. So what we've essentially done is both DSL and the LCDs have made recommendations. We've gone through them. They weren't particularly substantive. We had some clarification from them related to what DSL was in statute permitted to do in terms of creating banks. And so we, with their help, edited the language to sort of make sure that it fit within the confines of what they are currently allowed to do, and maybe make the transition easier to get something adopted more in the short run than the long run. So essentially, the base recommendations remain the same. The underlying portions are ones that have been edited. And we have gone through, feel like they've essentially kept the spirit of what we had originally intended. The one that maybe had the most significant change was our third recommendation, excuse me, it's and that's item 2A. It's an emergency measure to support the DSL establishment of new wetland mitigation banks for the next 5 years. DSL will pay new mitigation bankers for credit reductions that are due to soil temporal loss adjustments under OAR 141-085-0692. DSL will standardize the credit price across a region. DSL will provide payment after the mitigation bank instrument has been approved and use those funds allocated to DSL for this purpose. Additionally, during these 5 years, the studies will evaluate how the rule affects economic feasibility of new mitigation banks, provide guidance for measuring soil functions over time, evaluate whether the science behind the rule is consistent with soil disturbance, and also note that additional funding shall be provided to DSL to carry out this recommendation. So prior to this, the recommendation stated that we were asking for a deferment of that particular OAR, a 3-year period, such that mitigation banks could be during a process of studying, the feasibility of increasing the effect, the economic effect for mitigation bankers to be able to build them. We were asking for a 3-year hiatus, and DSL had very strong feelings against that. And so in lieu of that, we're looking for a funding mechanism to essentially permit bankers to be reimbursed for the economic loss from this new Oregon OAR. So that's kind of the heart of what it is. We're the primary change to recommendation A, other than we moved one component to recommendation C. And I think unless either Deb or Natalie have any other comments to make, that's sort of a brief summary.
Thank you. Anybody else from the committee have anything to add or? Sounds good. So I will entertain a motion for preliminary recommendation or adoption.
I make a motion to move this forward, recommendation A forward.
Okay.
Second.
Yeah. Councilman Flagan, and then was that Ben Lee that made the second?
It was me, Janny.
Oh, Janny, sorry about that. Your voices sound the same, sorry. I will turn over to Matt to do a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn.
Yes.
Councilmember Flagan.
Yes.
Councilmember Gertler.
Yes.
Councilmember Olson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mills.
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews.
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell.
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet.
Yes.
Councilmember Janney.
Yes.
Councilmember Hill.
Yes.
Councilmember Justice.
Yes.
Councilmember Cody.
Yes.
Senator Anderson.
Yes. You still there?
Yep. Representative Brees Iverson.
I'll vote yes.
Director Bell.
I believe Director Bell and Bateman are both stepped off.
All right. Co-chair Tevye.
Yes.
Any council members that I missed? All right, motion passes.
Thank you for that. And we'll go on to wetlands recommendation option C. Councilmember Flagan, are you going to handle that as well? Great,
I'm going to
thank you.
send that over to Eric as well. Thank you. Matt, can you bring up the C recommendation as well?
You got it.
Thank you.
Well, as I was just saying, the previous wetland recommendation A, we removed this particular recommendation, created its own. It didn't have support from DSL. I think we had talked pretty extensively last time about sort of upcoming changes to wetland regulations at the federal level through a Supreme Court decision. And our recommendation is essentially making kind of a clear delineation between state protected wetlands and federally protected wetlands, providing a mechanism to essentially provide a way to fix some of the problems or the funding that would could potentially be used for instance, local stormwater treatment facilities. That right now is limited essentially to any sort of mitigation funds would need to be used strictly for the creation or the enhancement of wetlands. So this would provide a source, an alternate funding mechanism to deal with some of the issues that are solved or fixed through wetlands, stormwater, flood control measures, building wetland banks, and wetland enhancements through this recommendation. So that's kind of the basic idea. It's unchanged from what you saw in recommendation A, one piece of recommendation A. Natalie, do you want to maybe speak a little bit more eloquently to it? Because it's
Well, I don't know if it'll be eloquent, but basically, I've always kind of wondered, you know, we have a wetland bank that's out in the middle of farmland. It's in the same basin as maybe the city in which you're removing the wetlands, but it's not next to necessarily the waterway. And it seems like it might be a better use of funds rather than, if we're truly thinking that the purpose of the wetland is to improve water quality and flood reduction in that basin, why not do that in the city where you are, where there isn't already the mitigation, right? Stormwater quality standards are relatively new, and a lot of cities have a lot of impervious area that's just outletting right into waterways untreated and with detention that doesn't really match what we would do today. So the thought being, rather than providing this water quality feature out in some farmland, let's use that money to maybe improve the water quality that is directly going into the impaired waterway. So that's kind of what this one aims at, is looking at, since they're not federally jurisdictional wetlands where you have to have the wetland bank, where the state can be more flexible, let's provide the flexibility when we're looking at ways to mitigate wetlands.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions for the team for this update?
Does this, Natalie or Eric, does this change, does this recommendation change the basic rules regarding if a wetland can or cannot be removed? So does this allow more latitude for a wetland, say within an urban area, to be mitigated for in different ways? or does it not change the fundamental way, the laws regarding wetland removal and mitigation?
Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but this recommendation says you're going to remove the wetlands. How are you mitigating it?
Right now, there's only one way to mitigate a wetland, and that's build a wetland elsewhere or enhance an existing wetland. That's the only way that you can currently do it by law, by federal law. Now, under state law, those rules can change as more wetlands become purely controlled at the state level, not at the federal level.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I would entertain a motion on this recommendation. For
Motion
preliminary
to move this forward. Oh, sorry, Chair
Okay,
Hartop.
yeah.
I
Yeah,
motion
I just
to
want to make
move. Oh.
preliminary recommendation, I believe, is what the terminology we've been using. So go ahead.
I move to make, I motion to move wetlands recommendation option C forward for a vote.
Second.
I second too.
Okay. Aaron and Eric, I saw you both flip up at the same time. So, okay, I think Eric got it though. I'll turn it over to Matt for a roll call vote.
Just to check for any discussion first on the
Oh
motion.
yeah, sorry. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and go for a vote.
Great. Councilmember Bunn,
Yes.
Councilmember Flagon,
Yes.
Councilmember Gertler,
Yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
Yes.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Anderson,
Yes.
Representative Brees Iverson,
Yes.
Co-Chair Tevy.
Yes.
Any council members I missed? Motion passes.
Thank you, everybody. We'll go to our next recommendation for third reading on wetlands recommendation with options group B. Is there anything that we need to add for that, Councilmember Flagon? Just go ahead and.
Yeah, Chair Tovey, we have not had, there's no changes to the recommendation. We're happy to answer any questions, but otherwise we can move forward.
Okay. Any questions for the team on this recommendation? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
I motion to move the wetlands recommendation option B or option B forward for a vote.
I second the motion.
Thank you, Councilmember Rockwell. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I will move over to Matt for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn,
Yes.
Councilmember Flagon,
Yes.
Councilmember Gertler,
Yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Didn't quite hear you, Van Lee.
Yes.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
Councilmember
yes.
Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
Yes.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Anderson,
Yes.
Representative Brees Iverson,
Yes.
Co-Chair Tevy.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much. And the fourth and final recommendation under land availability is the public lands for affordable housing recommendation. Is there any questions for the team on this recommendation? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion for preliminary approval for this.
I'd like to move we adopt this recommendation and move it forward.
I'll second.
Motion by Councilmember Madsen and seconded by Gertler. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I will turn over to Matt for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn,
Yes.
Councilmember Flagon,
Yes.
Councilmember Gertler,
Yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes, sorry.
Councilmember Rockwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
Yes.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Anderson,
Yes.
Representative Brees Iverson.
Thank you. I'm actually going to abstain on this one. We've just entered into an area where I probably just haven't been here long enough and heard enough conversation. I'm feeling a little less than confident on this issue.
Co-Chair Tevy.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Great. Thank you so much. That wraps up the third readings for land availability this week. We'll move over to land development and permit applications with Eric Olson for ODOT Opportunity Fund recommendation. Does anybody have any questions for the team on this recommendation? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I'll motion to move this forward.
Thank you, Councilmember Justice. Can I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Councilmember Janney. Any discussion on the motion? I see Councilmember Bunn.
I just want to make sure this is very clear. The 20 million is a placeholder number. I think to be really effective, that number is probably going to be higher. But the recommendation does call out that that is a placeholder until there's some good economic analysis behind it. But there is a huge nexus between ODOT requirements and capacity constraints on affordable housing, and is absolutely worth directing state funding to. So I'll be supporting the motion and wanted to make sure that was clear for everybody.
I thought you missed a zero.
Any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll turn over to Matt for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn,
Yes.
Councilmember Flagon,
Yes.
Councilmember Gertler,
Yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
Yes.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Anderson,
Yes.
Representative Brees Iverson.
I will again abstain. I always get itchy when we start talking about 20 million not being enough. So probably need to have a little better understanding. Thank you.
Co-Chair Tevy.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much. We'll go on to our next recommendation in the permit applications, land development permit applications for ODOT fast track recommendations. process. Are there any questions for that team about this recommendation? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion for preliminary approval for this.
I motion to move this forward.
I'll second it.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, I was gonna give the motion to Van Leet, but okay. Play something more over it. I got the motion from Van Leet and second from Justice. How's that?
Sure.
Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll turn it over for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn,
Yes.
Councilmember Flagon,
Yes.
Councilmember Gertler,
Yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
Yes.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Anderson,
Yes.
Representative Brees Iverson.
I actually do have questions on this one, so I can abstain at this point and we can maybe get me some answers.
Co-Chair Tevi.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much. That wraps up third readings for land development permit applications. We'll go on to codes and design. We have one recommendation ready for third reading. With expansion of ready-built plans, I'll return over to Councilmember Janney or any questions for the team, actually, sorry, on this recommendation. Hearing none, I would entertain a motion for preliminary recommendation approval for this recommendation.
I'll move preliminary adoption of this recommendation on ready-built plans.
Thank you, Councilmember Van Vliet. Can you get a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Councilmember Justice. Any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Janney.
Just wanted to clarify, since we did have public comment on this last time, that one of the real goals of this, or one of the things that we thought would be good about this recommendation would be the ability for more rural areas, or especially areas maybe impacted by natural disasters, to have a quick approval method for getting homes rebuilt. And we specifically left it at the types, the 2 homes and the apartment complex and a duplex, so that there would be a variety of housing types. So I just wanted to clarify that, because there was a testimony about changing the apartment complex building to a townhome style, and we specifically wanted it to be an apartment style.
Thank you for that. Any other discussion or questions? Okay, I will turn it over to Matt for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn,
Yes.
Councilmember Flagon,
Yes.
Councilmember Gertler,
Yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
Yes.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Anderson,
Yes.
Representative Brees Iverson,
Yes.
Co-Chair Tevi.
Yes.
I miss any members? Motion passes.
Thank you so much. Good work. We've got one last set of recommendations from the finance for today. Anyway, for third readings, and the first one is the OHNA governance recommendations. This one's updated, so I'm going to turn it over to the committee for some of those summary of those updates. So
The
Matt.
the red line was circulated. Everyone should have it, but the updates are pretty benign. Basically, we're incorporating one of the top line recommendations from the ONA, it was 3.2. And so the changes to the recommendation are really adding some text to flesh out around the coordinating authority of the new office to make existing state of Oregon departments work together and operate more efficiently. Additionally, we've added in the Department of Revenue as being called out as one of the identified agencies that the new office would have primary interaction with. So that's it for the update. It's pretty non-controversial. The committee just said, yes, that all tracks with the general purpose. So happy to answer questions. And the committee extends its thanks to our colleague, Co-Chair Flagan, who called out that, hey, this would be a good addition.
Councilmember Flagan.
I just wanted to say thanks for the committee to look at it and add the additional language in.
Any other
Mr. Chairman, if there's no questions, I'll make a motion to grant tentative approval to the recommendation.
Thank you.
I'd like to second that.
Councilmember Mattson makes a second. Any discussion on the motion?
If I may, Co-Chair Tubby.
Yep.
I also want to thank the fellows on the Finance Committee for incorporating this recommendation. We were discussing in the land availability work group, particularly around how we're addressing housing needs in more rural areas of our state. And so we see the importance of this addition in part by charging the state with having that comprehensive housing production strategy. That's not just, for the local jurisdictions that are doing those housing production strategies, but it's really a statewide housing production strategy. And for that, I'm really excited that it was added into this recommendation as well. So I'll be voting yes, of course.
Thank you so much. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll turn it over to Matt for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn,
Yes.
Councilmember Flagan,
Yes.
Councilmember Gertler,
Yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
Yes.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Anderson,
Yes.
Representative Brees Iverson,
Yes.
Co-Chair Tevy.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much. On to our next item is the SDC offset incentive recommendation. Is there any questions for the team on this recommendation? Councilmember Janney.
I don't know that it's a question as much as a general concern that if we are providing SDC waivers for anything under 120% AMI, that cities are going to become so underfunded from an SDC standpoint that we are not going to have the funds to reimburse developers who are building SDC eligible facilities. So I guess that's kind of a question. But that seemed like the SDC waiver for up to 120 feels like a lot.
I could respond to that. I think that, there's validity to that, and we've been struggling to figure out, everything is leaning on housing right now, it feels like, and it doesn't feel like it is. So funding for streets, funding for schools, parks, roads, all leaning on housing. And, we've been pursuing data and found some data regarding the positive economic impact of housing being larger than one particular housing unit, larger than the SDC payment. So the SDC's permits and fees in our state's most expensive jurisdiction are about $27,000 a unit. And the National Association of Home Builders data says that nationwide, the recurring economic benefit of a unit is $39,000 or $31,000 a year. It's in the recommendation. So, and this would come with a 10-year affordability covenant. So making sure that it's deed restricted for 10 years at that 120% or below. But your point is valid. But it's, I think, an effort to kind of reorganize the hierarchy, recognizing that at least for a time, we need to put housing at the top of the food chain and, recognize there's a lot of other economic impacts and benefits that come from housing, including supporting employers and job growth and increasing access and affordability. But I appreciate the comment.
Thank you. Councilmember Bunn?
Yeah, we had extensive conversation about this in the committee, and I'd like to point out that this recommendation isn't designed to exist in a vacuum. You're absolutely correct. If you kneecap SDCs, local jurisdictions will not be able to build things. But over the course of the year, we have, at least the committee's come to the conclusion that SDCs are a suboptimal way of financing infrastructure improvements. We talked about tying in some backfilling funding in this recommendation, but there's really two separate things. One thing is to say, hey, we know that SDCs are an impediment. And particularly, we know that there's a huge impediment at the 60 to 120 level because there's all sorts of subsidies below 60. As soon as you get to 61%, there's a subsidy cliff. So extending this up to 120% AMI both attack the SDC barrier and the fact that we need to do something for that middle income band. Completely separately from that, and if this is implemented or not implemented, we need to fix how we fund transportation and sewer and water. And so we have other recommendations that are moving through about funding those. The timing of it becomes a little bit tricky, but if this was adopted, it sure would put a lot of pressure on people to figure out a good, sustainable funding system. But the thought process behind this, and this is just good to get into the public record, is that the things that SDCs fund are public goods. They're arterials and collectors. And we've backed ourselves in a corner where we say we want a public good and we want it at this level of quality, and that one person's going to pay for it. And that has driven up the cost of housing to a point where we're operating under an emergency order. So you're absolutely correct in your question and your analysis of the economics. And I'm sensitive to that, having been a former local elected. But the answer is that this recommendation doesn't exist in a vacuum. So I summarized like 3 months worth of conversations there of Tom saying, hey, we need an SDC waiver.
I might just add a little bit too, is that, part of the reason why we're only tentatively approving these is because we want to go back at the end and do a find common threads or find where those can actually be mutually supportive. I'm looking just even in our agenda today, we had the housing cash bounty that might actually be a way to pair it for individual cities to receive funding from a different mechanism and make up a portion of that. So I think there's some ways that this will not be existing in a vacuum, even through our recommendations. Anyway, Councilmember Jenny.
I appreciate the discussion, and I understand that there is merit into separating these different ideas. My fear is that it will get adopted in a vacuum, not necessarily by this group, but when it gets outside of this, when we go to the next step. And that as an unintended consequence of that we could see SDCs be raised in general to help offset the loss, because now there is a tax on the infrastructure, because the general premise being that that a development is paying for its impact on existing infrastructure, right? That's the general premise of an SDC. So I just would really like to make clear, if we're adopting this, that is attached to some alternate funding source, that we can't just say we're waiving for everything under 120. Because if that is the case, we will have development still paying for infrastructure, still constructing infrastructure, and not having the funds to get reimbursed for it as an unintended consequence.
Would you like to respond to that, Councilmember Bunn? Okay, I didn't know if your hand was still up.
No,
Any other-
no, I think she's right. That's my response.
Okay. Any other questions or comments to the team on this recommendation? Okay, I would entertain a motion on this recommendation.
Chairman, I move a tentative approve. I second Tom's motion.
Okay.
This was his baby. He deserves it.
Seconded by Bunn. Any discussion on the motion?
Well, I forgot, I was wanting to make this point while I had the chance and I forgot to, but I don't know, and I wasn't in the financing work group, but did you guys, I don't remember if there was another conversation around SDCs, but one of the easiest low-hanging fruit ones that I was hoping we were going to tackle was basically just pushing something out to allowing or not allowing, but requiring SDC payments to be charged at the end of the process. And I know some cities have pushed back on that. It's frankly, I think, a pretty weak argument because Washington does it and other states do it. And frankly, that's something, especially when we're looking at interest rates at 9 or 10%, that is something that doesn't really cost cities anything and can save us thousands of dollars on every house. And so that's one that I'm frustrated that we haven't been able to get more tractions with cities and the state in pushing this. And so I don't know if that's something we want to include as part of this or if it's too late in the process, but that's something I was hoping we were going to get in.
We did talk about it. I don't remember what context it was under. And we received a decent amount of testimony that there are cities that allow it and they have very low uptake. Now, I think that's probably a consequence of backward-looking data during a 1% interest rate environment. I think today you would probably see more uptake on that. Does anybody else on the committee remember?
Part of the challenge is, and I've looked into this probably more than I should, but a lot of cities do allow it, but they don't allow it for free. They basically say, you know, they charge you a fee, they charge you some interest, which it's always maddening to me that, you know, the system isn't impacted until somebody moves in the house, yet you have to pay your impact fees a year before somebody moves in the house. And if you waive those, then you have to pay the interest and the holding costs for not paying them at the time. It's probably been one of my most frustrating things in dealing with this stuff.
And the SEC methodology people would say you could defer payment, but next time they rerun their rate model, that will result in higher SDCs because SDCs are, you back into them from the cost of the system. Now, is that, I'm not taking a position on that argument. I can just say that is, that would be commentary.
I would support Justin's thought if we can work it in somehow.
Councilmember Van Vliet?
I think all I would add is that you're surfacing exactly what we did try to uncover at the finance work group, is that the system is broken. And there's people in cities are incented to do things in a contorted way. And every time you do a workaround, it ends up costing housing something. And so our package, which includes this infrastructure funding surge and some of these other things, is very much intended to try and call attention to the fact that the way we're paying for the public goods is broken. And so, I mean, I'm hearing the concerns, and I don't know what the co-chairs think the alternatives are. You know, maybe it goes for a straight up or down vote, and the value is that we've had the conversation, but I totally hear the concerns. And, you know, from where I'm sitting, I feel like it's important to make the policy statement through this channel we have, which isn't the end of the line, that system needs to change. So that's where my head's at.
And maybe I would add is maybe, I don't know if, I was trying to figure out if there was another recommendation in this conversation that is separate from this, or if it needs to be added to this. And I defer to Bunn and Matthews on as co-chairs of the committee on to move forward. And I'm okay. I mean, yeah.
We can bring something back if that's the direction of the full group. The mechanics of it are going to be that the local jurisdictions will say, well, how do we assure we get paid? That leads to, okay, you need some sort of security interest in the property, or you're holding up certificate of occupancy. Local jurisdictions don't want to hold up a C of O. If an apartment building gets built and it's sitting there and something's not paid, no city councilor wants to deny a C of O over a procedural matter. So there's fear from the city staff side on that. We had a discussion about the state stepping in and bridging the gap. And that's when I think it was Margaret that raised her hand and said, every time we Band-Aid around this stuff, we make it worse and more complex. And that's where our conversation shifted to, we need to move away from having such heavy reliance on SDCs. But we can propose more Band-Aiding. I mean, it's perfectly logical and makes sense to me. And I think it would make sense to have a uniform statewide system if you did that, that just said, you don't pay till the end and the state will handle the security interest portion, just create a statutory lien or whatever's needed to do that.
Yeah, I'm kind of with I think that the co-chairs on this, that, you know, in the finance committee, we've put forth a number of recommendations, and many of those have to do with providing funding specifically for infrastructure, and even funding not tied to infrastructure for housing production to local jurisdictions. So, you know, I feel like that there is work that has been done in separate recommendations that works well with this particular recommendation, and that the city of Portland's own inclusionary housing study determined that this is the most important and the biggest lever that can be pulled to increase housing production. So I feel very good about this. Now, it doesn't mean everybody has to, of course, but I think quite a bit of work has been put into it and thought, and I'm happy to work, if that's the sentiment of the committee, to rework it, but I do think it's not happening in a vacuum.
The final thing to note, I'll recall from our discussions, is that we had some concern about implementation timelines for our recommendations. A lot of our big ideas will take years to implement. This can be done immediately. And so if the governor is looking for an option to provide immediate relief, this is a lever that can be pulled.
And the funny thing, sorry,
one quick question on that. Does this one have a timeline on it? So it's just for the 10-year period?
We did recommend it. The affordability timeline's 10 years. I don't think we sunset it because we were hoping that we would transition to a better system of funding.
Right. And I do want to comment on Councilmember Cody's comments. It kind of brings us full circle to the original concern about whether or not this is happening in a vacuum. And I think from a co-chair standpoint, it's that none of this is in a vacuum. And that's going to be one of the themes that's going to have to be placed in there, because we have a lot of recommendations that are very specific to a very specific challenge, and that's where the unintended consequences are, is making sure that we're kind of addressing for those. And at least having those comments as part of the recommendation in the final package would say that this is a really good recommendation if this was approved. But this is something to worry about as an unintended consequence, that if you don't have something else kind of to mirror it, that it may be less successful. So I do want to just kind of throw that out there. That's something that we're very concerned about on all these recommendations, to making sure that none of these are happening in a vacuum and that all these are mutually supportive. So, Councilmember Janney, did you have something?
Yeah, I was along for the ride that it wasn't happening in a vacuum until the last thing you said, Daniel, which was that while the other financing things could take years, this one could happen immediately, which again puts a big hole in what is going to pay back developers for SDC eligible reimbursements. I agree the system is broken, it needs to be changed. I'm worried about that stopgap. So I was with it until that.
No, just, I want to make sure I understand this. So you're worried about just the reimbursement for developer builds an arterial, and 90% of that needs to get reimbursed, and there's no pot of money to reimburse it.
Yep.
I think that's a pretty narrow issue that's easy to fix. So I would be fine working an amendment for that. I think the bigger issue is cities are going to say, we're going to blow a hole in our budget. That's going to be 10 times bigger. But Natalie brings up a good point for a developer who's acted in good faith to majorly amend the SDC regime and leave them holding the bag because they only have 10 years to get reimbursed or whatever, you know. That I think that's a minor fix that could be done.
I mean, I've got projects that don't have building permits yet that would easily qualify for this waiver if it were to go into place, but the infrastructure, the SDC eligible infrastructure has already been in place. And so is there going to be a way for them to get costs back on things that they should? I mean, this isn't their share. So this doesn't, that gap part from my perspective, and that's probably because we prepare SDC reimbursement for developers, doesn't feel small.
Thank you. Councilmember Wood.
Well, just circling back, since I opened up the can of worms on the deferral of the timing. It's probably not the right thing to put as part of this because I mean, even though they're SDCs, they're really separate issues. So I don't know if we want to try to squeeze in another thing, you know, another proposal since we're getting down to the wire on these things. The funny thing is I don't think it has to be a difficult thing. City of Portland actually basically already does this now. So and for as much as it's been fascinating to me, for as much as complaining as I've heard about how difficult it would be to do, Portland simply just has us record a waiver that gets put on title, and you can't clear title without repaying your SDCs. And you know, and there's always going to be the push of, well, what happens if the guy doesn't clear title and doesn't switch? It doesn't happen very often, but that can happen in Portland too. And if it does happen, there's a time frame on it, and I want to say it's 18 months. And at that point, penalties and interest and start racking up. So it's not a very difficult thing to do, and it's not something that requires a bunch of manpower. It's literally, you know, recording one document on the project, and you're done. So.
And just to that point, I'm wondering if that just might be some of the more technical stuff that is kind of hammered out in implementation of this in the next steps. And so I think a lot of these have some of those kind of finer details that might have to be hammered out. Councilmember Hill?
I just see Justin's proposal, the arguments made against it are completely afar from what he proposed. We're just simply asking, as I see what he's asking, is just wait until the structure gets occupied before you pay the SDCs. It's not a waiver of them. It's not forgiving them anything else. It just hold them back until the tail end, which can save a lot of money and interest on the upfront cost of the unit and makes it cheaper to build. I don't see all the arguments, you know, because we're not waiving it, we're not giving it up, we're just postponing it till the project is done.
And I will say, just to add, because there's some conversations about doing it at C of O, and I do think that does present some challenges that requires a little bit more tracking from the cities to, you know, track to make sure they don't release your C of O. And that also opens up a can of worms of what happens if you get to a project that there's, you know is going to happen. The builder's got $100,000 of SDCs on a project outstanding, and he's out of money. How does he final the project? How does he pay it off and stuff like that? So that's why it removes a lot of those issues if you just put it at transfer of title, so that you don't have that issue. Just when it sells, it pays off. So it just is a lot cleaner way of doing it. The cities don't have to mess with tracking it. So,
or it might be a bonding situation too, where they just get bonds for them. So we do have a motion on the floor. If there's any other discussion, happy to entertain that. But if not, we'll move on to a roll call vote. Any other conversation?
Just to sum it all up, I think these are good discussions we've had. I still support tentatively approving it as drafted, but if at the end of the meeting, the committee wants to give direction to look at a couple other things, I'm also happy with that, but I don't think it's necessary to hold this recommendation to look at some of those other options.
Okay. Sounds good. I'll move over to Matt for a roll call vote on SDC offset incentive recommendation.
Councilmember Bunn,
Yes.
Councilmember Flagon,
As it stands, no.
Councilmember Gertler,
I'll vote yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
No.
Councilmember Matthews,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes, as long as I'd like to come back and add some stuff onto it in the future.
Councilmember Rockwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
As it stands, no.
Councilmember Hill,
I vote yes with the recommendation that we revisit with what Justin Wood wants to add as a separate issue.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Anderson,
As a former mayor, I will be voting no. I like the discussion and I'm glad it's on the record, but without, with separating how to take care of the actual need for the cities, I'll be a no.
Representative Brees Iverson,
Reese Iverson is a no.
Co-Chair Tevye,
And by count, I think that puts us at a tie, or pretty close. I'm given the controversy and the conversation, I'm going to go ahead and vote no on this, just to have the review, so that we can have a conversation with Councilmember Wood about some of the recommendations in order to be able to bring it to get a more of a consensus in the committee.
motion passes
Does it pass?
11-7.
You need a majority of the full group.
No,
I
Councilmember Bunn, the co-chairs reviewed the executive order, and since it specifies in the executive order, we've updated the voting guidance. It specifies that the statutory standard doesn't apply and that it's a majority of the members present.
Sorry about that. I was counting up to 12. It's required for minimum. Sorry about that. So it does pass. Thank you for that. But I do, I guess, Matt, when should we have a conversation about that? Should we just defer that back to the committee for any kind of recommendations to bring forward on that, or how should we have that conversation?
Yeah, Co-Chair Tevye, I would recommend that the work group just reconvene to have some more conversations about this prior to the council in December discussing the full slate of recommendations to see if there are any updates that they'd want to bring forward at that time.
Okay. Thank you so much. We'll go on to our last third reading for the day, which is middle income housing fund recommendation. Are there any questions for the finance team on this recommendation? Senator Anderson.
Yeah, could you just do a quick update and remind us what this one really curtailed?
This one's pretty.
Oh, you went on to mute again.
Let's try that again. This one's pretty straightforward, Senator. It calls for direct funding from the state for housing that is deed restricted between 60 and 120% area median income. The driving force behind this is that there's a significant amount of both federal and state funding available at 60% and below, and then it falls off a cliff once you get above 60%. And we know when we look at the estimated need that that's a huge underserved area. As we looked at all the other recommendations that we're working through, there wasn't a lot that targeted this. And so it's, well, economically efficient to just say we will provide a direct cash subsidy. There's also, we had some significant discussion that dollar for dollar, subsidizing at higher AMIs will produce more units. As you move up the affordability ladder, there's more market rate debt that can be carried. So given that there's a limited amount of funding that's available, if we're just trying to maximize the number of units produced, we'll get more bang for our buck here than in other funding. Now, there's a big caveat there about equity, but just the math is if units are units, this is a good path.
Just to follow up, if I could, if there was no direction, we'd generally be looking at a general fund contribution, or who cares? But we're really just saying this up to 120% needs some type of subsidy.
Yes. We segregated this from the revenue conversation. It's really calling out there's a huge hole of people that, earning 100% of median income is not super comfortable in this state, unfortunately. And so.
Yeah, agreed. No problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more conversation or discussion or questions for the board or for the team?
Co-Chair Tubby.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah,
that's okay. I just wanted to offer, when the committee was talking about this one, we did spend some time talking about the funding source, to your point, and tossed around what had been House Bill 2980 in the 23 session as a possible model. But for a variety of reasons, we decided to separate out the solution from the funding source, sort of like we did with the SDC thing that we just tossed around. In any event, I think it's very consistent with things that, for example, are within the Housing Innovation Partnership and some of the same sort of policy discussions, but just no funding source attached in this recommendation.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to grant tentative approval to the Middle Income Housing Fund recommendation.
Councilmember Bunn, can I have a second?
I would be thrilled to second.
Okay.
Co-Chair
Thank you, Van Vliet. And any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I will move to Matt for a roll call vote on this recommendation.
Councilmember Bunn.
Yes.
Councilmember Flagon.
Yes.
Councilmember Gertler.
Yes.
Councilmember Olson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mills.
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews.
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell.
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet.
Yes.
Councilmember Janey.
Yes.
Councilmember Hill.
Yes.
Councilmember Justice.
Yes.
Councilmember Cody.
Yes.
Senator Anderson.
Yes.
Representative Brees Iverson.
Yes.
Co-Chair Tubby.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, everybody, that's our last of our third readings for this round. It is 3:13. We've got about 45 minutes left in the day, and I think we've got about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 12, 13, 14. First reading recommendations from the committees to be read through. So we will just kind of start at the top and start working on land development and permit applications from Eric Olson on 5-foot wetland buffer recommendations. And I kind of calculated out, we've got about 3.5, 4 minutes per topic. And we'll update that average as the time goes on. So please be judicious. If we don't get through them, we'll get them on to the next round though. So Eric, do you wanna, or you wanna pass?
Yeah, pretty simple recommendation here. As we talked about at a previous meeting, anytime you do any sort of development around a wetland, you have to also now, due to water quality reasons, have a buffer. Those buffers can go as close as 2 to 5 feet from the actual wetland. But the prescriptive for federally protected wetlands and state protected wetlands is 50 feet. And we are looking for a prescriptive method to limit that always to 5 feet through have DEQ provide a prescriptive path toward that. That makes a huge difference in terms of making projects viable and essentially taking less of the land out, making more of the land buildable. So that's the essential idea behind this recommendation.
Any questions for the team? Councilmember Bunn?
Yeah, briefly, Eric, when you say you have DSL or DQ provide a prescriptive path, it's here's the mitigation you do to get it down to 5 feet during construction, right?
Correct.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, so it just goes on to second reading, so we'll put this on the agenda for the next reading. We don't have to vote for these to go to second reading, do we? I'm sorry, I'm blinking on our process.
Nope.
Nope, they just go to second reading. Okay. Hearing no other comments or recommendation or questions on this, we'll move to the next recommendation, also from the land development permit applications for LDP 120-day recommendations. Are you doing that as well, Councilmember Olson?
Believe Tom is doing that.
Okay.
Whoa, an ambush. Can you please pull it up? Sorry about that. I wasn't prepared for that.
Oh, sorry, Tom.
That's okay.
I'll pull it up.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Yeah, this one, just to get, we've talked about this one quite a bit at committee, perhaps even at the full work group level, but the goal is to expedite the land use permitting process, which is not always adhered to by local jurisdictions. Sometimes applicants are even asked to waive the 120-day legal requirement, which is the time period that jurisdictions are required to either issue a approval or denial. So that's what this recommendation is getting at. I'm sure everybody's diligently read it, so I'll stop there, considering the time.
Any other questions or comments for the team or Councilmember Cody? Seeing none, we'll move to the next recommendation for first reading under codes and design. The first one is annexation and comp plan 180-day recommendation. Councilmember Janney, are you doing these or?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So this one, for annexations and comp plan zone changes, they do not have a statutory timeline that other limited land use cases have. And so this would be establishing a statutory timeframe for those types of applications. And under the assumption that they're more complicated than your typical limited land use decision, they'd be given 180 days as opposed to 120 days. This would apply for annexations that meet the current criteria under ORS 222.127 section 2, and that those would then become a type 2 review. Enclave annexations, which are those that are already surrounded by property within the city, would have a shorter time frame, and it states that LUBA would have the ability to review all annexation decisions, because currently they do not. Also, it would direct the state to develop a recommendation to comprehensively look at annexation statutes to determine if those need to be updated and changed to provide better criteria. So that's the summary of this one. I will stop for any questions.
Any questions for the codes and design team? Hearing none, we'll go on to the next one. Sorry, for TIA and proportionate share recommendations.
This one's a little bit longer. Currently, not all jurisdictions allow background traffic counts to be taken when school is not in session. ODOT has a method that allows for counts to be taken in off seasons, but it doesn't necessarily apply. It doesn't work very well in cities where ODOT facilities are not going through the city. So this would allow for either the ODOT method to be adopted for the seasonal adjustment, or for the city to develop their own adjustment factor so that background counts wouldn't need to be delayed until school is in session. After that, it breaks down into, if you have a TIA done and you find that you need traffic mitigation, is that traffic mitigation because of an operational deficiency, or is it because of a true safety need? If it is not because of a true safety need, the developer shall be allowed to propose interim mitigations or pay their proportionate share and just be done with it. And then the city would be responsible for putting in the rest of the mitigation. These are a little bit out of order, but when a TA is required for land use, this kind of touched into Tom's previous recommendation, but the submission of the document shall satisfy the completion review. The review of the document cannot be held as a part of the completeness review. When the offsite mitigation is needed, I already said that. So when the offsite mitigation is determined to be a safety concern, the developer would have the ability to pay 200% of the engineer of record's estimated construction costs. And then that would allow either the plat to record, which would allow for building permits to be issued, or for building permits on like a multifamily site to be issued. And then so that you can still work through the construction approval process and the construction of the traffic mitigation while the buildings are being built. And so this would tie it to a certificate of occupancy. So no certificate of occupancy would be issued until the mitigation is in place. And this is just because, you know, a multifamily building takes 9 to 12 months to construct. And so that's a lot of time to allow these two processes to run concurrently. And also the issuance of a plat is not what creates the traffic, right? The people living in the homes is what creates the traffic. When acquisition of property is required to service a public facility that's outside the city limits, so the city butts up against the county, the city has the ability to acquire the property without the county's cooperation. And then reimbursement for the traffic mitigation would need to be complete within 5 years if it's an SDC eligible. It's an SDC eligible facility. And then reimbursement districts for any infrastructure improvement. Currently, they have a statutory expiration, and they would have no. This would remove the statutory expiration. So that was a lot. I'll stop for any questions.
Any questions for code and design? Okay. Hearing none, we'll go over to the next one, to legislative training recommendations.
For new legislation, LUBA cases, and revised OARs, this would say that cities would need to have someone come to the training annually to hear the context of the new rules and how they're to be implemented. The idea being that that way there's consistent implementation of new rules across the state. And then that could also be open for members of the development community as well, so that we all know kind of the rules that we are playing by.
Any questions for the code and design team on this recommendation? Hearing none, we'll go to the next one, which is stormwater recommendation.
Okay, so for stormwater standards that are required based on DEQ's MS4 permits, DEQ should provide clear and objective criteria for what cities need to have in their stormwater standards. And that stormwater standards should not limit stormwater mitigations beyond what is required by DEQ. This is because in certain jurisdictions, some jurisdictions limit the types of things you can do for detention as well as water quality treatment based on their personal preferences for operation and maintenance. And so you can have jurisdictions right next to each other that have very different stormwater standards. And when you ask them why, they always say it's because of their MS4. They always blame DEQ. And in our discussions with DEQ, I don't really think DEQ is providing as much guidance for it. I think they're more giving cities a lot of latitude in determining the standards, but that's creating some really stringent standards in some cities and some less stringent standards in other cities. And then on infill and middle housing subdivision lots, stormwater facilities shall be allowed to deviate from the geometric dimensional standards in order to provide stormwater detention and treatment. So basically, if you have a planter box that you need to put out in front of your middle housing development, if it needs to be 12 inches deep instead of 9 inches deep, you're allowed to do that if it means that you're able to provide the treatment and detention that is required for that development. So that is it for that one.
Thank you. Any questions for the code and design team? Seeing none, I will move over to the next one, which is the new, the GC utility hookup recommendation.
Riley, if you want to chime in on this one, since this was important to you.
Sure. As the law currently exists, you can have a utility contractor put the water, sewer lines, conduit for telephone, power, so forth, in the public right of way. That same contractor cannot, and he's put the service into the building. He's already tested the water, chlorinated it, so forth, gone through all the inspections, but that same contractor cannot cross over onto the private land and run the sewer and water service or electrical conduit into the site. And without having a licensed plumber or a licensed electrician under his employ. The process still, if it's done by the general contractor or excavation contractor, still has to be tested and inspected by the proper jurisdiction, plumbing inspector or electrical inspector, to do so. This creates undue burden on the general contractor because of your scheduling. And it also adds $500 to $1,000 a unit cost per each project, because you have to worry about the scheduling process and bringing the excavation contractor in and out several times. And so it only makes sense that this be allowed to happen, because it's still inspected. Currently, an HVAC contractor, the general contractor can act as the HVAC contractor. And so we're just asking that this be clarified and allowed to move forward. Any questions?
I personally think this is great, Riley. I actually just had this happen to me in Portland, where we literally just put some empty electrical conduit in the ground and kind of my excavator and the electrician were working to get it put in, but it's kind of maddening that we actually have to have the electrician supervise the excavator to put just to put some empty conduit in the ground for electrical. But I think this is great.
But it's still inspected. The electrical inspector has to come, no matter who did it, has to come and inspect the depth of the conduit, or the depth of the water, or the depth of the sewer. Yep. So it's not like it's getting bypassed. It just speeds the process up, and it's still safe. And it's ridiculous that the excavation contractor, who can work in the public right away, can't cross over and work in the private sector.
Yep, agreed.
Thank you. Any other questions for Councilmember Hill, or the code and design team, actually? Thank you. Hearing none, that wraps up the next round of recommendations for first reading from code and design. I will move over to finance for outside transaction counsel for OHCS recommendation.
Okay, I should have my screen sharing. So this recommendation would allow OHCS to, or would require OHCS to use dedicated legal staff for transaction processing. So right now, the way our system is set up, if you're a state agency, you have to use the Department of Justice or use the Attorney General's office for all of your legal counsel. And there's some very good reasons for that. However, there is a material impediment to getting affordable housing money out the door currently with that process. Real estate deals are complex enough. Real estate finance is complex. Affordable housing is an order of magnitude more specialized. And that documentation gets sent over to the AG and it gets processed in the order that it's received, it might be dropped on different attorneys' desks who may or may not have worked on any type of real estate, let alone affordable housing financing. So we think that there are some significant efficiency gains to be made by authorizing the use of dedicated specialists when it comes to preparing the transaction documents. And by transaction documents, I mean the trust deeds, the deed restrictions, the intercreditor agreements, things that are, you know, if you get out in the finance world, pretty standard, that it's just the way that they're done, but you might not see them all the time just as a general attorney. So there's a couple of different implementation methods this could go. We could look at statutory changes. The Attorney General has the capacity to appoint special assistant AGs, so they could engage a law firm that does this kind of work and give them special assistant AG status. It doesn't really matter how that it gets done. It's just there needs to be a quicker turn time on document prep, review, and execution because time kills deals. And right now, the slow process of legal review is killing deals that are funded. So are there questions on that? Doesn't look like it.
Oh, sorry. Was that you, Councilmember Bunn?
That was me, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So,
no questions? If not, we can move to the next one, which is the pre-development program recommendation.
So this recommendation would allow a grant program of up to $250,000 for deed restricted affordable housing. So this is pre-development money that is truly a grant. And I know Joel should speak about this. I know because he's super knowledgeable on it. I'll just say a couple of things. That it is difficult for smaller organizations or for groups that are specializing on a particular population. Pre-development can be the biggest hurdle that keeps them from even getting in a place where they can apply for funding. And if this is an area where the government needs to be comfortable putting a little bit of money at risk, which is why we structured it as a grant. Sometimes you do your pre-development and you say, this project doesn't really work and we should abandon it. And we fall into a trap sometimes when we give pre-development loans, or if we keep it inside OHCS and they really want to make the deal work because they've already put money into it, they fall into a sunk cost fallacy, and we need to break that a little bit. When you're trying to put together complex projects, you're not going to bat 1,000. So this is setting up a true grant program to say, you know, here's the box you got to work within, but go explore and see if you can put this together. And we're not going to financially burden the organization if for some reason the project doesn't work and everybody made a good faith effort. So having said that, I'll stop. Joel, do you want to chime in?
Great job.
Or anybody else from the committee?
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Hearing none, thank you so much, finance team. We will move on to workforce shortages with Erica Mills for the 5-year investment. Are you presenting those or are you?
I'm going to actually hand this first one off to Deb.
Okay.
Thank you, Erica. Matt, do you happen to have just the one slide that I had sent over?
Yes, I do. I'll pull it up.
Thank you. So this is a pretty robust construction workforce development program. It's connecting workers, which is pre-apprentice and apprentice program workers with jobs. So local employers that are that have jobs, construction jobs in the area. Next slide. This is a investment of $77 million, which is very significant. It's $15 million a year for each year for 5 years. And the total number is 12,000 workers that has been identified that we need over the next 10 years. And so the recommendation is that this could generate up to 6,000, so half of those as trained and skilled construction workers, and that's why this is so robust. in regards to the details of this, it would connect programs that are already in place. So this would not be adding new programs, but taking programs that we have and standing them up and funding them, and requiring them to work together a little bit more. The first thing would be is that we would take the local workforce development boards. There are 9 of them in the state, and they would be the hub for the coordination between high schools, the community colleges, and the employers, which they already do in the communities, to facilitate this workforce development program. We would adopt a BOLI curriculum statewide standard, so everyone would be following that same standard. We'd also create another curriculum that would be for a secondary workforce of surveyors, inspectors, and permit technicians. There would be a wage reimbursement section for the local contractors that are hiring these pre-apprentice and apprentice programs or students. And it would be specifically for affordable housing projects. And there would be funding for support of the community colleges to have additional staffing for instructors, as well as the support of the ESD and the CTE programs for instructors as well. And then the last item is that there would be mobile units, so we could utilize the pre-apprentice and apprentice programs in our rural communities and also our tribal areas. I know that that's quick, but any questions?
Thank you. Any questions for the workforce team? Thank you so much. We'll move on to the next one with next recommendation for community colleges.
Yes, thank you. I'll start this one and then Deb can jump in. I'll pull my screen up here to share. Sorry, I've got one screen and 5 recommendations. Let's see. Okay, so this recommendation is to expand the ONA, Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, to specifically include Oregon's 17 community colleges and the housing needs for the students they serve. Theoretically, this could also include the staffing at community colleges. We recognize that community colleges represent a significant opportunity both for housing need, but also for housing solutions. Community colleges are often the location where apprentices get their classroom time, as well as many building professionals, permit technicians, et cetera, go through programs at community colleges. So this is a little bit of a double bottom line where community colleges have a clear need for housing for their students, but also in supporting that student housing, we may also be supporting workforce development for some critical housing production workforce jobs. Deb, do you have anything you want to add to this one?
No, just I think that the most important thing is just the fact that this is part of the regional housing needs analysis piece and that it's considered.
Other questions on this one?
Questions or comments for workforce team? Councilmember Metzen.
Thank you, Co-Chair Tubby. So in this recommendation, are you referring to like on-campus student housing, or is it not that specific, community-based, or not distinguishing between the two?
That's a great question. We actually spent quite a lot of time going back and forth and realized that of the 17 community colleges, there's a very significant disparity in the capacity, land availability, infrastructure to available land, even just the makeup of the communities within which the colleges are situated. And so we kind of pulled back from some previous thoughts about utilizing college campus land and just change this to being added to the ONA, because the population and attendance of community colleges is really drawn from the larger community, drawn from the state, and in some cases even students are coming internationally to attend Oregon's community colleges. And So there's the opportunity exists that housing anywhere within that community could be supportive of students at the community college.
Joel, this also, based on your and my conversation initially with a couple of the SMEs regarding the public lands, was originally how this came about, and then we brought it to our committee and really started digging into it a little bit more. This is where we ended with the conversation.
If we'd had more time, I think we maybe would have been able to come up with something a little bit more specific, but what we felt it was critical that community college housing needs and the housing insecurity of students be addressed in a way that's meaningful for the community, which is why we've added it to the ONA and specifically asking that it be called out in the regional needs analysis.
Thank you so much. Any other questions on this recommendation? Seeing none, I'll move to the next one for the recommendation about a coordinating body.
Yes. Okay, we did quite a lot of listening and learning in the process of this, and throughout, especially within the first few months as we were really diving into different topics, and each SME would recommend that we listen to a different SME because that, you know, their organizations or their agencies had opposing directions, or there was some gap between the pipeline through one agency to the next agency. And it was very common also that we would hear SMEs suggest that, well, if this other agency had, had their process work a certain way, then our process would fit with it, and only to find that the first agency's process did work the way that the second agency wanted it to work. And so there's just was a real lack of communication. Organizations that, community-based organizations, state agencies, local agencies, et cetera, all seemed to be very disjointed in their efforts toward workforce development. So this recommendation is just about bringing everybody together in one coordinated body so that there could be, really clearly aligned goals and pipelines to get workers from the couch to a productive job and producing housing.
Any questions for the workforce team on this recommendation? Seeing none, we'll go to the next one, which is the workers' comp recommendation.
Yes. So this recommendation would really be benefited from the passing of our first recommendation, which was the increasing of the apprenticeship to journey worker ratios, but it could also stand on its own. And this is about improving the equity of access for both apprentices and construction contractors. Currently, in our system, the employers who act as sponsors of apprentices pay those apprentices wages. Those wages are tiered, so the less experienced apprentices get a lower wage, but the employer is responsible for that entirely on their own. Additionally, there's some administrative burden with hiring apprentices. There's lower productivity of those apprentices. Yes, they are getting paid a lower wage, but also not only are they themselves less productive than a journey worker, electrician, or plumber, et cetera, but they're demanding time of the journey worker to supervise them and ensure that they're doing work correctly. So there is some extra cost associated with having apprentices on board. Additionally, employers participate in the local committees and the larger state council advising on apprentices and overseeing the whole apprenticeship program. And that also is at the employer's expense. So what it seemed like is that there's a barrier to entry for smaller businesses, rural businesses, businesses that are owned and operated by people of color and women. And so in order to help overcome that barrier, what we're recommending here is that there be a state subsidy or other compensation methods so that employers the state will cover the wages and benefits of first year and possibly second year apprentices to help offset that expense for the employer, but also to help cover the administrative burden of employers sending staff to participate in these oversight committees. So the hope there is that we can get apprentices into companies that otherwise wouldn't have access to hosting apprentices, but that also culturally it's meaningful for that employee. Employees, particularly people of color, can have challenges trying to navigate workplaces whose culture is not aligned with their own. And so having all of these, having a greater diversity of employers in the system will help bring in more apprentices and retain them. And it'll also help in the committees and the council help to influence decision-making in a way that's supportive of more diverse employers and apprentices in the market.
Thank you. Senator Anderson.
Thanks. I guess this sounds very familiar to something that already exists, where the state through the workforce hubs pay half of the compensation, right? So I'm trying to figure out where's I hear the focus and I like that. So what's really different? What are we?
Yeah, I think I know what you're suggesting, Senator Anderson, and yes, the funds that come through the workforce hubs, and will come in the next recommendation, but those funds are inconsistent and not very predictable. And so it can be difficult for employers to navigate that system and understand when those funds are available, how they can access funds. So this recommendation is really trying to boil that down to something much more simple, predictable, more ongoing, so that it's easier to access, really bringing those barriers down.
Question? Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I have a question too. So the funds for this particular initiative would not be funds to cover the cost of salaries, but to cover the cost of additional administrative burdens, right? Is that what?
The recommendation is written in 2 points. So one would be to cover the wages for first and second year employees, apprentices. The second is to cover the administrative burden, and that may indeed be wages. It may be that employers are paying hours for staff to attend council and committee meetings, to participate in decision-making and oversight, and the cost of those hours are not productive. They're not earning revenue off of those hours. So in that case, yes, that may be wages as well.
Thank you. I really like this recommendation.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Sounds good. And we'll move on to our last first reading recommendation for HP Corps.
Yes. Okay. So in light of Senator Anderson's astute observation that there are funds available for some things, we're also recommending, there we go, a housing production core. This is sort of modeled after the California Conservation Corps or the existing Job Corps model. In fact, it could perhaps be built off of the existing Job Corps model. And it may require some alternative. However, what we're recommending is a boot camp of sorts to fast track workers into productive jobs within the housing production arena. So those likely would include construction trades work, but could also include building professional and planning professional work as well. So the existing Job Corps model is typically residential, as is the California Conservation Corps. So students will come and live full-time as they're gaining experience working, on-the-job experience and classroom experience. And so we're recommending that we build off of that to really create strong pathways and pipelines for students and young people to enter housing production related careers. A big critical component of this is that there is a fast tracking aspect because it's residential. Or typically is residential, there's an opportunity that some efficiencies can be gained and students can be more immersive in their learning and hopefully accomplish those learning goals in a shorter time frame. So this is really to address the issue that in order for construction trades specifically, but also for many of the professional planning positions as well, there's a number of years, years of experience required in order to get your license and be able to go out there and contribute independently and productively to the workforce, housing production workforce. So what we're proposing is that this workforce core will give the opportunity that that time period can be shortened and we can get people out on the street productively contributing to housing development sooner rather than later. This also gives an opportunity for greater recruitment of students from low income or other challenging life circumstances and is a great second chance for people coming out of the justice system as well. Would anybody from workforce like to add to this before we go into questions?
Just as an anecdote, here at the Union Patillo Indian Reservation, about 20, maybe 25 years ago, we had a program called Salmon Corps. And we have an entire generation of tribal members who link their connection back to the fisheries and getting back into fishery and natural resource production back to Salmon Corps. Entire generation of people kind of really that's how they got back into like career and kind of got a career started out. And I think this is something really good that could almost define a whole generation of people going into the workforce. So thank you for the recommendation. Any other comments, questions? Hearing none, that is our last of our first readings for next week, or not next week, in 2 weeks, sorry. I will, first of all, thank you everybody. I want to thank all those that from the public that provided testimony today during the second readings. A lot of them might have stayed on, see our process. Thank you for engaging and being a member of the public that's engaged in this and really encouraging to see people wanting to see an increase in housing production. Thank you all to the workforce, or sorry, to the work groups. It's an enormous amount of work that you guys are doing. I keep telling everybody, we were at Senator Anderson and Joel and I were at a summit this last week talking about housing and how to deploy funding and into rural areas, specifically in housing production and infrastructure production and construction. And I touted the fact that I know nothing and you guys have done an enormous amount of work. I just feel like I'm just getting to go for the ride and get to defend all you guys' amazing work. So thank you all for the work you're doing. And with that, we've got about 7 minutes left, so I'll turn it over to Matt for next steps and our next meeting time.
Yep, thank you, Co-Chair Tevye. I'll just add my appreciation, and I'll also convey the governor's appreciation. She was just mentioning the other day in reviewing everything, she sees how much time and work that everybody's putting into the process, and I know she really appreciates it and says thank you for all of that. As far as next steps go, our next meeting will be in 2 weeks, so November the 17th. And for folks that are keeping track, there are now 57 recommendations that have been submitted to the full council. 26 have been preliminarily adopted. And we have for the next meeting 16 that are slated for third readings, 14 for second readings, and at this point, none for first readings. So just appreciate all of it. And then we also, I believe many of the work groups are winding down their work or are closed, but I will make sure to give updates to the full council on anything we hear back from the work groups.
Councilmember Joel.
Thank you, Co-Chair Tovey. Matt, thank you for rattling off those numbers. He was like reading my mind. I was like, wait a minute, how many have we done that have been preliminary adopted? And it'd be really helpful if we can get a succinct list of those that have made it through. We're just hearing from some of our, some of the SMEs that have been involved or other industry groups that are just eager to hear updates on this process. And that would be a good way to be able to do that. That'd be helpful if you could provide that. And then I have a question just about the upcoming meetings. I know I missed the last in-person meeting, but is there talk about having another in-person meeting here before the end of the year that we could factor into schedules?
That's a good point. Should have probably read that up onto our next co-chairs meeting, because I think that at the last in-person meeting, I think there was a desire for us to adopt the final recommendations as a group altogether, and so I think we're trying to judge when that will happen, at what point in time in December. But I'll probably defer to all you, and maybe Matt can put out a email of when people are available, and some of those times that are kind of available in late December. Yeah, because our charge is for about 8 more weeks, and so that will put us in like the 1st or the 8th or the 15th of December. Then we get into holidays.
Sure thing. Councilmember Madsen, we can definitely send out the full list and the status of each of the recommendations. Happy to do that. And then Co-Chair Tovey can definitely pull the group. And, I'll just go ahead and say, I don't think it's an issue if, as a formality, the final meeting is happening in January. I realize everyone's schedules can be a bit hectic in December. If there is a strong interest, and I'll reach out to everybody, if there's a strong interest to try and get together and do the final adoption as a group, I think the governor would be fine with waiting until January.
Sounds good. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody. With that, we will wrap up with about 4 minutes left of your day. And have a great weekend, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
See you.